Sometimes the biggest changes in history, they come from the smallest things. We're talking about a simple chemical formula today, just 3 ingredients that literally rewrote the rules of war, toppled entire empires, and completely reshaped the world as we know it. So how did this simple mixture do all that? Let's get into it.
Okay, first, I want you to just imagine something. Picture a world with no explosions, no guns, no cannons, nothing. A world where battles were all about swords and spears and bows, where victory depended on who had the tallest stone walls or the strongest suit of armor. A world of pure muscle and steel.
But then, something happened. Way back in 9th century China, there was this completely unplanned, totally accidental discovery. And get this, it wasn't made by soldiers or generals. Nope. It was discovered by monks and alchemists.
And that single discovery? It created a brand new formula, not just for some chemical reaction, but for power itself. This, my friends, is the story of gunpowder. So here's the crazy part, the incredible irony of it all. The guys who discovered gunpowder, they weren't trying to make a weapon, not at all. These Chinese alchemists were actually looking for an elixir of immortality, a potion to make you live forever. And instead, they accidentally stumbled upon the very first chemical explosive in human history. Talk about an unexpected result.
So what is this stuff, anyway? Well, at its heart, gunpowder is a pretty simple mix. You've got saltpeter, that's potassium nitrate, plus some sulfur and charcoal. On their own, these ingredients are, well, they're not that exciting. But you mix them together, whoa, you get a substance that burns so ridiculously fast that it explodes.
Now, the real secret sauce wasn't just what was in it, it was getting the ratio perfect. I mean, for centuries people tinkered with it, but this specific formula, 75% saltpeter, 15% charcoal, and 10% sulfur, that became the gold standard. The saltpeter is the key, really. It acts as the oxidizer, which means it provides all the oxygen the reaction needs to burn like crazy.
Okay, so you'd think, right? They create this explosive powder and immediately it's all about weapons. But that's not what happened. Its very first uses were actually for parties, for celebration and spectacle. Seriously, the Chinese started by packing gunpowder into bamboo tubes to create these incredible, dazzling fireworks. They used it to send signals during festivals. They even made these primitive thunderclap bombs that were really just about making a huge, loud noise, not causing destruction. And get this, they strapped little tubes of it to arrows, basically creating the world's very first rockets.
So how did we get from party trick to weapon of war? Well, the game changer was an invention called the fire lance. Sometime around the 12th century, Chinese soldiers had this idea. What if we strapped a bamboo tube full of gunpowder to the end of a spear? And that simple, almost crude combination, well, that was the granddaddy of every single gun that came after it. There's actually an account from the time in the history of Jin that describes just how terrifying this thing was. Just try to imagine you're a soldier on the battlefield. You're facing a guy with a spear, okay? But this spear is shooting out a 10-foot jet of fire, smoke, and eventually even bits of shrapnel. It's no wonder that even the Mongol warriors, these guys were the most feared fighters in Asia, were reportedly terrified of the fire lance.
An invention this powerful, it wasn't going to stay secret for long. Thanks to the Mongol conquests and those sprawling Silk Road trade networks, the knowledge of gunpowder started to spread. It made its way through the Middle East, and by the late 1300s, you had knights in Europe using the first very primitive firearms. The formula for power was officially going global.
And when gunpowder hit Europe, it wasn't just about a new toy for armies. Oh no. It kicked off what historians now call the military revolution. This wasn't just a small change. It completely upended the entire logic of warfare, politics, even the very structure of society itself.
Let's just break down that shift for a second. Before gunpowder, what did power look like? It looked like a massive stone castle. It looked like a knight in shining, heavy armor. But now, a cannon could turn that stone wall into rubble in a matter of hours. A simple firearm could punch right through the most expensive suit of armor. Suddenly, warfare wasn't just about muscle and steel anymore. It was about technology and chemistry.
And the consequences of this were massive. Think about it. All those feudal lords hiding out in their impenetrable castles, suddenly they weren't so safe. Their power just crumbled. Instead, kings and central governments, the ones who could actually afford huge armies with cannons and guns, they became the dominant players. This technological shift is a direct line to the rise of the modern, centralized nations we have today.
So, in this brave new world where technology was suddenly king, Who were the big winners? Who were the ones who really mastered this new kind of warfare and used it to build absolutely massive empires?
Well, the answer to that question gave us what we now call the Great Gunpowder Empires. We're talking about the Ottoman Empire, the Safavid Empire in Persia, and the Mughal Empire in India. All three of them built their incredible power on the back of this new technology. They used enormous cannons to smash ancient city walls and gave their best soldiers firearms. This let them conquer and control huge territories faster and more effectively than anyone had ever seen before. Their success was, without a doubt, a direct result of mastering this explosive new formula.
Okay, so we've seen the incredible historical impact, right? From changing a single battle to building entire empires. But to really, truly get a handle on its power, we got to look at the science. What's actually happening inside that explosion? So let's geek out for a minute and break down the chemistry of all this change.
The fancy scientific word for what gunpowder does is deflagration. Now, this isn't a detonation like you'd see with modern explosives. It's actually an extremely, extremely fast burn. It burns so fast that it creates this huge expanding wave of superhot gas. And that rapidly expanding gas, that's where all the power comes from.
It really breaks down into 4 simple steps. First, you need ignition, just a little heat, a spark. Second, the saltpeter in the mix almost instantly releases all of its oxygen. Now, this is the really clever part, because it means the reaction doesn't need any air from the outside. That's why it can burn inside a sealed-up gun barrel. Third, the supercharged burn creates a huge amount of hot gas, like carbon dioxide and nitrogen. And finally, number 4, those gases have nowhere to go but out, so they expand violently, and that's the force that shoves a cannonball or a bullet out of the barrel at incredible speed.
Just pause and think about that for a second. This wasn't just some new weapon. This was the very first time in history that humanity figured out how to harness the power of a controlled chemical explosion. That is a landmark moment for chemistry, for engineering, for all of technology, really. So let's wrap this all up. That simple 3-part formula, it did so much more than just change how battles were fought. It tore down old political structures. It literally redrew the map of the world by creating these massive new empires. It kicked off waves of technological innovation, and it fundamentally, permanently altered the path of human civilization.
And that really leaves us with one last big thought, doesn't it? Gunpowder is just this perfect, powerful example of how one single technological breakthrough can have consequences that ripple out for centuries, changing absolutely everything. It brings up a question that we're still dealing with today. What happens when a single invention gives humanity the power to reshape the entire world in an instant?